Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight we have a story about four boys who are living in Northern California and they spend the night in this abandoned cabin. And what happens during the course of this night is so frightening, they never return. That's next. Okay, so we are in the cabin tonight. It is rainy and windy out, and I am very comfortable right where I'm at. And so that's why I'm here. And for tonight's beer, check this out. It's called the Lift Bridge Mango Blonde. Look at that. There's a totem, very Polynesian looking totem. And he looks very squatchy to me. Pretty frightening looking. And this Lift Bridge Brewing Company is referring to the Lift Bridge in Minnesota, in Stillwater, and it connects from Wisconsin to Minnesota, this bridge does, and the middle of this bridge lifts up mechanically to let boats go by, then it lowers itself back down, and you can continue to walk over. It's now a walking bridge, and this is where my good friend Tim lives, and I just saw him a couple weeks ago. So, all right, Lift Bridge Mango Blonde. I like amber, blonde, pale ales. Oh yeah, boy, that is very, very light looking. Very blonde. I'm gonna take it right from the can here. It's got a mango flavor apparently. We'll find out. Wow, very mango-y, if that's even a term. But I can feel and taste this fruity type flavor, very mild bitterness, very smooth finish, almost champagne-like. Wow, I can really taste the flavoring of it. Mango Blonde, Lift Bridge Brewing Company. All right, cheers. Okay, so our story takes place in Northern California in 1965 in Humboldt County. Humboldt County is a very interesting place. It has the rugged Northern California coast. Inland, there's redwood forests, coastal mountains, wild rivers, wilderness, Redwoods National Park, Humboldt Redwoods State Park, Avenue of the Giants. You also have the communities and towns of Eureka, Willow Creek, and Myers Flat. Also, Humboldt County is known to have more Bigfoot sightings than any other county in all of California. And California has had more Bigfoot sightings than any other state in the United States outside of Washington. Also, in Humboldt County, the Redwoods and various locations throughout that county, in 1983, they filmed the Ewok forest scenes from Return of the Jedi in Humboldt County. Love that movie, great movie. Now, Myers Flat is a small community, even today, with just a little over 200 people. And it's in the middle of Humboldt County along the Eel River. Very interesting location. The Eel River goes through town and does this big horseshoe, continues on to the west, and this in the middle of this horseshoe where Myers Flat is located. And this is where these four boys lived in this area along Highway 101 in the Redwood Forest. And these four boys were Butch, Joe, Mike, and Keith. They were really good friends, grew up together. They loved to go biking together, go down to the Eel River and go swimming in the summertime. And they enjoyed getting on the back roads and riding their bikes, for half the day. And this is what I used to do when I was a kid with my friends. We would get on these country roads, gravel roads, in the park reserve that I grew up next to. And I mentioned this in the previous video. And we could go for miles and then just ditch the bikes and go hiking, go climb an apple tree and eat apples, check out abandoned farmhouses. And so this is what these boys were doing. They're riding on this road about 2 or 3 miles west of Myers Flat. They went up this logging road, went back on a route they'd never been before, come around this corner, and they see off to their left, to the north of them, this abandoned cabin, at least what appeared to be an abandoned cabin. They stopped, they were looking at it, they decided to ditch the bikes into the tall grass, hike through the forest, and get into this clearing, check out this old cabin. They saw no indications that anybody was living there. There was no vehicles, there was nothing outside, there was no junkyard in the back. And they walked around this cabin, and Joe said, "Hey guys, the front door is open." They went inside, and they could see it was pretty dirty and musty inside, but there was a couple windows, had just enough light in there. And they're looking around, and Joe said, "Hey, what if we made this our own hangout? Kind of cleaned it up, fixed it up, made it our own hangout." And the other guys thought this was a great idea. And these guys were all in the range of 13, 14, 15 years old. And so they got back on their bikes, went home, and came back the next day, and they had hammers, brooms, garbage bags, and some other tools to clean up and start fixing up this old cabin. Butch said, "I think this is an old logger's cabin." Guessing from the 1900s, maybe 1890s, 1920s, somewhere a long time ago. And they were really excited to clean this place up and make it their own. They eventually started working on it and fixing it up. One of the guys, Keith, his dad was in construction. He had some extra carpet. They were able to get that out there, put the carpet in there, just laid it out in the hardwood floor. There was 2 beds inside. They rotated the mattresses so they could have some beds to sit on, and replaced a couple of the window panes, fixed the door so it swung nice and smooth and it pushed in, and they even put a latch on it to lock it at night. And they're really excited about this. I feel like Mr. Rogers putting on the sweater here. Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to my neighborhood. Can you say cryptozoology? Neither can I. So that summer, July 1965, they're hanging out at the shack, so what they like to call it. And Joe said, "Hey guys, what if we spent the weekend here? Like did a camp out?" And the guys liked this idea, and so they all got their gear together. They had these Army surplus store rucksacks, and they put sleeping bags, food, their gear in it, and a couple of the guys had a Coleman lantern, 2-burner Coleman stove, and Joe even brought his .22 that he got from his grandpa, and he stuck it in the back of his backpack, put the flap over, and he was able to ride this out to the shack. They got to the shack, got their bedrolls rolled out. Butch and Joe each took a bed on the left and right side. Mike and Keith rolled up their beds on the floor, and they set up the stove, had the lantern in position, and then Joe said, "Hey, let's go take the .22 out and go plunking cans." So they went around the back of the cabin, found some old cans in this dump that was behind the cabin, these old beer cans, And they placed him up on this log, and they started plunking cans and just having a good time, taking turns with the 22, shooting it and shooting cans. And then it was starting to get late, and they said, all right, let's go in and make some dinner. Back in the cabin, got the 2-burner stove going. They were boiling some hot dogs, had some beans, and then they put the frying pan on with some French fries, making their dinner. And then Keith says, hey guys, I'll be right back. I gotta go do my business. There was no bathroom, there was no outhouse, and so he goes out the front door of the cabin, goes around the side, goes kind of kitty corner to this clearing, and then goes about 10 feet into the forest. He's doing his business, and he's wrapping up, and to his right, he hears what sounds like 2 people talking. He hears this chatting, and he can't make it out. It doesn't make any sense to him, but he's just thinking, oh, a couple of the guys must have followed me out of the cabin or came shortly after I did, and now they're over there talking. And it's very thick forest, and he takes about 4 or 5 steps towards this sound, which is about 20 feet away, and he says, hey guys, hey guys. And all of a sudden this chatting stopped. It was dead quiet. And he had this little bit of a chill come over him, because he thought maybe there was somebody out there, and now he alerted them to his presence. He didn't know what was going on. And then in the next moment, it was like the forest erupted. Something came crashing through the forest straight towards him, breaking branches, moving straight in his direction. And he had no time to think about, to wait to see what it was, to figure out what it was. He just had this fight or flight response. He immediately turned and ran out of the forest, ran up the side of the cabin, back into the front door of the cabin. He comes bursting through the front door, closes the door, puts the latch down, and he's out of breath. He's like, guys, I just heard something in the forest. And they said, what did you hear? And then he said, did anybody follow me out to the forest after I left to go to the bathroom? And they said, no, nobody left. We've been here the whole time. And he said, well, I was out there and I heard some chattering, some talking. I assumed it was you guys had followed me, and I took a few steps, and then this something charged through the forest straight towards me. It sounded really large. And they're like, you're kidding me. And they all got up, and then Butch said, well, let's go check it out. And he opens up the door, and they go out around the back of the cabin, and then Keith points to the forest, and he says, right over there, like 20 feet in the forest is where I heard this. And Butch starts walking towards the tree line, and then Keith says, be careful. And then Butch says, yeah, we're fine. And then they're looking, they're listening, and then Mike and Joe walk up behind Butch. They don't hear anything, they don't see anything. They're standing there for about 2 minutes. And then Butch says, had to be a bear. Had to. And then Joe said, yeah, deer wouldn't do that. Sounds too large to be a deer. And so Butch turned and he started walking towards the cabin again. He goes, all right, we got to be careful, but we'll be fine. And so they all went back into the cabin. So now back in the cabin, Joe and Butch were still talking about what this could possibly be. They were concerned that there were some people outside. And then they both concluded this had to be an animal, most likely a bear. And they're like, all right, we'll be fine. Now this cabin, the front door of it, was only about 5 feet tall at the top of the frame. It's just how they built these cabins in these old days, these old miner cabins, logger cabins, very small. The guys finished their dinner, cleaned up, we're hanging out for a little while. It's getting late, and then Butch, he's kind of in charge. He's the 16-year-old. He said, "Hey guys, let's get some rest. We got a big day tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to it." And so he kind of points at Mike and says, "Hey Mike, you want to kill the lantern?" And they were all ready, and he cuts the lantern off. And the old Coleman lanterns, and I grew up with these, once you shut the fuel off, the lantern globes still go for about a minute or so, and then it slowly just fades out. I always remember that. And so this light is fading out, and they're saying goodnight, and then they're sound asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, Mike is awakened to the sound of this deep huffing behind the cabin. This huffing sound, this kind of deep exhale. He immediately rolls over because he's on the floor next to Keith, and he says, "Hey Keith, Keith." Keith turns his head and says, What? "There's something outside." Keith is immediately quiet, and they're listening to this thing, and they can hear it now walking along the back of the cabin, this kind of deep footfalls in the dirt, walking along the back of the cabin and then coming up the side of the cabin. Right then, Keith says, hey, to the other two guys, Butch and Joe, who were up in the beds, and he said, "There's something outside." And they didn't say a word, and they're all listening now, and this thing is walking up the side of the cabin, and they can hear it stop. And they can hear it's touching the lower part of the cabin where these loose boards were. They could hear this like rubbing paw or hand or whatever it was. And then it grabbed one of these boards and started prying on it. This eerie creaking sound. It was prying this board off the cabin. They're sitting there in the darkness listening to this. Then it continues to walk around the front. And right at that moment, Butch says to Mike, "Mike, light the lantern." And Mike said, "You sure?" And he goes, "Yes, light the lantern." So Mike rolls over, gets a match going, turns the lantern on, pumping it. The lantern's now lit. And they can hear this thing still continuing to walk around the front of the cabin. There's a window to the right of the front door. And they can see this shape walk by the window. Just this, almost like this darkness filled the window, and then it was later again. And there was moonlight to the south. The cabin was south facing. There was a bucket to the right of the front door, and this thing bumped into it or touched it or something, but just for a moment, there was like this sound from this bucket. Which says, "Keith, open the front door." And Keith says, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" And Butch says, "Do you have any better ideas? Open the front door." And then Butch immediately reaches under the bed, pulls out the 22, this semi-automatic 22, pulls the lever back, and he sits up in the bed, and he holds it towards the doorway like this. Keith is hesitant. He reaches over, turns the knob, and he's behind the door, and he pulls it open, and he can't see what's going on. And because of the lantern light, whatever was out there was standing in this doorway, in this small doorway, and all they could see were these dark, hairy legs in the doorway, and just part of this torso near the top of the doorway. Keith immediately fired 2 shots from this 22 towards the doorway. this thing let out this horrendous scream, very frightening, spun around, and then they could hear it take off running. This thud, 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 heading towards the tree line. It faded out, and then they could hear in the forest branches breaking, and then that fading out, and then everything was quiet. Keith immediately pushed the door shut, put the latch down, and then all the boys were standing up, and then Joe said, "That was definitely not a bear." And they're talking, and then Butch said, "If this thing comes back, we have to be ready." So he said, "Help me out." And he walked around to the back of the bed, and he started pushing the bed, and two of the other guys helped him push the bed up to the door, block the door. They knew they couldn't get on their bikes and leave. There was no way to communicate to the outside world. This was 1965. They had to make do. They took their sleeping bags, they put them into the middle of the floor, and they huddled together for the rest of the night, just hoping this thing would not come back. The next morning, they got up and they did not sleep well at all. They all got up and they went out to investigate. They looked around and they saw 3 or 4 indentations out in the front of the cabin where this thing had spun around, and then they saw some tracks heading toward the forest, very undiscernible, but they found 2 of them. They could see some toe prints in them, very good size footprints. They found no blood anywhere. Butch said, "I don't want to be here if this thing comes back. We need to leave." And so they went back to the cabin, got all their gear, packed it up, got their packs on, and they left on their bikes, never to return. They all agreed before they got home not to tell the parents what had happened. They didn't know what the parents would do, and they really didn't know what had happened themselves. The next day, they all got together, and they were talking about it, trying to figure out what in the heck happened. And Joe said, "My grandfather used to have stories about what he called the hairy man." And Joe remembered this, and it started to make more sense now. These legends and these stories from Northern California. And his grandfather even said the Hoopa people, tribe of Northern California, had a name for these type of beings. They were called Oma, which translates to boss of the woods. And they concluded it had to be some kind of a being like this, some kind of a Sasquatch that they'd experienced. 20 years later, they were still friends. They would still get together from time to time, and they felt free to talk about this. And Keith always remembered that whatever this was that they saw in this doorway, these large hairy legs and this extremely tall creature, most likely had to be what was in the forest when he was by himself. And this thought just gave him chills and kept him up at night even still. And that is our story from Northern California in Humboldt County. Pretty wild. 1965. Wow. All right, you guys. Thank you for watching. We got more stories coming, and I appreciate all your comments and appreciate you guys watching. Please like and subscribe if you like what I do. That's always extremely helpful. And thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. as always, keep hiking.